The rough rope chafed Astrid's wrists as her father shoved her into the center of the clearing, where men of iron and scars waited in a circle. She stumbled over her own legs, knees hitting the frozen early winter ground. She had lived 20 springs, and now she was to be sold like cattle at the market of Hiddeby, offered to any jarl or merchant who paid enough to cure the infertility that cursed her clan's lands. Her brown wool dress, the best she owned, was torn at the shoulder where her father's hand had gripped too tightly while dragging her through the village. Her blonde hair, once carefully braided by her mother, now fell disheveled over a face stained with tears she refused to shed. Astrid's blue eyes scanned the faces of the gathered Mengries smiling fat merchants, warriors too drunk to be a threat. Old jarls seeking one last seed for their lands. And then she saw the one who made her blood freeze in her veins. Halvard the Bonebreaker stood leaning against a tree in the shadows, apart from the others. The berserker's reputation swept through all of Jutland like a cold wind through the forests. They said he had killed 30 men in a single battle at Lindisfarne, that his eyes turned white when the fury of the gods possessed him, that no spear or sword could pierce his skin when his blood boiled. He wore leather reinforced with bear claw marks, a bearskin over shoulders broad as a barrier against Scotty's cold. Dark brown hair fell to his shoulders in warrior braids fastened with silver rings, and a scar crossed his face from forehead to left jaw, passing over an eye that remained intact only by the sheer luck of the Norns. He did not look at Astrid like the others. There was no hungry desire in his dark eyes, no calculation of how many children she might bear. There was something deeper, dark recognition, as if he knew her from another time, another place, another life woven by the threads of fate. Astrid's father shouted her attributes to the buyers as if selling a breeding marae. He said she was strong, hardworking, that her hips were wide and promised many children. He did not mention that she could read runes, taught in secret by the village Velva before the old seer died. He did not speak of how Astrid had dreamed for 3 nights straight of black ravens and white wolves' omens that terrified her. A fat merchant approached, squeezing Astrid's arm as if testing the firmness of market meat. She instinctively pulled back, but the rope around her wrists held by her father allowed no escape. The man smiled, revealing rotten teeth, and offered 10 silver coins. Another jarl raised it to 15, then 20. The crowd grew animated, bets and shouts filling the air as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows among the trees. Then Halvard moved. The berserker crossed the clearing with heavy steps, and silence fell over all like a cloak of the dead. He did not speak. He simply threw a leather bag at the feet of Astrid's father, the metallic clink of coins inside louder than any thunder. 50 silver coins, perhaps more. No one dared to check or question. Halvard's hand, large and marked by old scars, reached out toward Astrid, waiting. Her father, greed gleaming in his eyes like dragon's gold, cut the rope from his daughter's wrists with a quick knife. There was no farewell, no blessing or word of comfort. Only a final shove toward the warrior, and the sound of coins being eagerly gathered by hands that had once held Astrid as a child. Astrid looked back one last time and saw her mother among the onlookers, silent tears streaming down a face aged before its time. But the woman did not move, did not protest. She had accepted her daughter's fate as she had, accepted the infertility of their lands, with bitter resignation and hope that sacrifice might bring back fertility. Halvard did not touch Astrid. He simply began to walk, and she followed because there was nowhere else to go. His camp was set apart, near the river where longships rested like sleeping beasts upon the sand. Warriors of his clanet, men of iron and scars, looked up curiously when they saw the berserker return with a woman. One, a younger man with a sparse red beard, laughed and made a lewd remark about the nights to come. Halvard turned so fast the wind whistled. His fist struck the young warrior's jaw with force that sent the man 3 steps back, spitting blood and teeth. No one else laughed. No one else spoke. The berserker pointed to one of the ships and said in a voice deep like stones rolling down a mountain that they would leave at dawn, before Suna raised her golden chariot above the horizon. Astrid was taken to a small tent, separate from the others. Inside was only a bearskin, a locked wooden chest, and the smell of leather and metal. Halvard stopped at the entrance, his silhouette blocking the twilight. He spoke for the first time since choosing her, his voice carrying the accent of northern lands beyond the mountains. He said she would sleep there alone, that no one would touch her, that at dawn they would sail for his fortress on the coasts of Rogaland, where the sea beats furiously against black rocks. Astrid tried to ask why he had bought her, what her fate would be, but Halvard had already turned away. Before disappearing into the shadows, however, he glanced over his shoulder, and his eyes carried the weight of 1,000 battles in something more. He said only that the Norns had woven their threads long before either was born, that she would know why when the time came, that fate could not be avoided even by those who ran from it. Astrid remained alone in the tent as night fell and Odin's stars shone coldly in the sky. In the distance, wolves howled in the forests, and she wondered if they were ordinary animals or if Fenrir was stirring in his eternal sleep, an omen of Ragnarok that every Norse feared. Her hands still trembled from her parents' betrayal. But something deeper was awakening, a dark curiosity about the warrior, who had paid a fortune for her without demanding anything in return. She did not yet know that Halvard carried a curse worse than barren lands. She did not know that the berserker fury that possessed him in battle was growing, consuming his humanity little by little like rust devours iron. She did not know that Velvas from 3 regions had prophesied that only one woman could save him or destroy him completely, and that woman carried in her eyes the icy blue of the northern fjords. At dawn, as Suna began her journey and the warriors prepared the ships, Astrid was led to the largest longship. The carved wooden dragon at the prow seemed alive, painted red eyes staring at the horizon. Halvard stood at the helm, unmoving as ancient stone, and when the oars began to beat in a hypnotic rhythm against the dark waters, Astrid knew she was leaving behind everything she had ever known. The river gave way to open sea, and the shores of Jutland disappeared into the morning mist. The north wind blew strong, filling the red and white striped square sail. Warriors rowed in silence, only the creaking of wood and the distant cry of gulls breaking the quiet. Astrid sat at the prow, fingers gripping the cold wood as waves struck the ship's flanks with growing force. 3 days at sea transformed Astrid from a sold woman into a survivor. The waves of the North Sea had no mercy for weak stomachs. But she refused to show weakness before the warriors who watched her with a mix of curiosity and distrust. She ate the dried fish and hard bread they offered, drank sour mead without complaint, and when storms came at night, she tied herself to the mast to avoid being swept away by Aegir's furious waters. Halvard rarely spoke, but his dark eyes never stopped watching. He slept less than any man, remaining at the helm even when Mani crossed the sky in his silver chariot. The other warriors whispered that the berserker did not need sleep like ordinary mortals, that Odin's blood ran in his veins, that he had already touched Valhalla and returned. On the 4th morning, the coast of Rogaland emerged from the mist like wolf's teeth-black cliffs of volcanic rock rising from the water in impossible formations. Deep fjords cut the land, and in the most remote of them, protected by natural stone walls, stood Halvard's fortress. It was not large like the halls of powerful jarls. It had no ornamented towers or wrought iron gates. It was a brutal construction of black oak logs, a double palisade surrounding the complex, and a long house at the center, with a turf roof and smoke rising from side openings. 2 wooden totems flanked the entrance. Odin in his warrior form with a spear, and Tyr holding a raised sword. protection from the gods of war for those who lived by the sword. The fortress inhabitants emerged as the longship docked. Women, children, warriors too old for raids, thralls working on the docks. All stopped when they saw Halvard descend with Astrid beside him. The women exchanged meaningful glances, whispering behind their hands. One of them, tall with red hair braided with amber beads, approached with a hostile expression. Ingrid was her name, and she had been Halvard's concubine before he left for the last raiding season. She spoke with a voice sharp as a blade, asking who this weak woman was that the Jarl had brought, whether he meant to replace those who already served in the Longhouse. Ingrid's green eyes pierced Astrid with poorly disguised hatred. Halvard did not answer. He simply gestured for Rolf, his second-in-command, a man of 40 winters, with ritual scars covering his arms, to take Astrid to the women's quarters. Ingrid spat on the ground near Astrid's feet before turning dramatically, her green wool skirt swishing as she marched back to the Longhouse. The quarters were simpler, separate section of the Longhouse where free women slept in wooden bunks covered with furs. There were 8 in all, of varying ages, all looking at Astrid with the distrust only women know how to cultivate. The eldest, a woman of 60 winters with white hair braided into a crown, introduced herself as Thera. She had been the wife of Halvard's father, widowed when the old Jarl died in battle 15 years before. Thera explained in a voice roughened by too much mead that Halvard had never brought a woman to the fortress before, that he lay with whomever he wished but never offered status or permanent protection, that something in the Norns had changed for him to act this way. The other women agreed in silence, and Astrid felt the weight of a larger destiny pressing on her shoulders like armor she had not asked to wear. That night, there was feasting in the main hall. It was not a formal BLT with sacrifices, just a banquet to celebrate the warrior's return. The central fire cast dancing shadows on wooden walls carved with scenes of ancient battles. Long tables formed a U around the hearth. Warriors sitting on benches drinking from decorated horns, eating roast pork and dark bread. Astrid was placed at the high table, a position of honor that increased the murmuring. Ingrid sat 3 places down, anger pulsing in every movement as she served Med with unnecessary force. Halvard sat in the high seat at the center, Rolf to his right, and an empty chair to his left, where a Jarl's wife traditionally sat. He gestured for Astrid to take that seat. Silence fell over the hall like heavy snow. Even the thralls stopped serving. Ingrid dropped a ceramic jug that shattered on the packed earth floor, golden liquid spreading like blood. The women at their table exchanged shocked glances. Rolf leaned toward Halvard, whispering something urgent, but the berserker repeated the gesture more firmly. Astrid moved slowly, each step echoing in the tense silence. She sat in the chair, hands trembling slightly in her lap. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, judging, measuring, speculating about what kind of magic or curse she carried to deserve such honor. Then the skald rose. Bjorn, the saga singer, was a thin man of 50 winters with a grizzled beard split into 2 braids. He carried a small harp of pale wood, and when skilled fingers touched the strings, the sound silenced even thoughts. He began to sing in a deep voice that reverberated in the wooden roof beams. The saga he sang was ancient, from a time when Odin still walked freely in Midgard. It spoke of a berserker cursed by the gods for killing a priest of Freya in blind fury. The warrior was condemned to lose his humanity little by little, each battle consuming more of his soul until nothing remained but a raging beast. Only if he found a woman marked by the Norns, one who carried the gift of calming storms in her blood, could the curse be broken, but the price would be high, for she would have to give something precious in return. Astrid looked at Halvard and saw the tension in his jaw, his hands clenched into fists on the table. He did not look at her. He did not look at anyone. He just stared into the fire as if answers to questions he could not even form lay there. The night wore on with more mead, more meat, more songs. Warriors rose to recount past battle deeds, exaggerating numbers and glory as they always did. Women laughed when appropriate, served when needed, and Astrid remained quiet in her unearned seat of honor, watching everything with eyes beginning to understand that she had been bought not out of desire or need for children, but for a much darker destiny. When the moon was high and many had passed out drunk on the benches, Halvard finally stood. All who were still conscious did the same out of respect. He announced in a voice that brooked no argument that Astrid was under his direct protection, that anyone who touched or insulted her would answer to his sword, that she would be treated with the honor due a free woman of high status. Ingrid let out a scornful sound before leaving the hall with heavy steps. Other women followed, some with envy, others with genuine concern. Thera remained, old eyes studying Astrid with the intensity of a Velva reading runes. The elder woman approached after Halvard left and whispered low enough for only Astrid to hear. She said she had dreamed for 3 nights of a white raven and a black wolf fighting under a bleeding tree, that the raven had won, but its feathers were forever stained red. She said Astrid carried the mark of the Norns in her soul, that Halvard had brought her not by choice, but by the inevitability of fate. Then Thera revealed the secret no one else dared speak aloud. Halvard was losing the battle against the berserker fury. The transformations happened with increasing frequency, even outside combat. He had already attacked allies by mistake, wounded thralls who approached at the wrong time. A Velva from a nearby village had prophesied that in 3 full moons, he would become completely beast-stand when that happened. He would need to be killed like a rabid wolf, unless Astrid was the one to save him, but Thera did not know how. No one did. The prophecies of the Norns were always cruel enigmas, truths revealed too late to change the ends they wove with threads of unchangeable destiny. Astrid went to her bunk that night with a swirling mind. She slept little, and when sleep finally came, she dreamed. She saw Halvard transformed into a giant wolf, white eyes empty of humanity, jaws dripping foam and blood. She saw herself standing before him with hands outstretched, runes glowing on her skin like cold fire. And she saw the price blood from her own life draining to feed magic that could save or destroy. She awoke with a scream trapped in her throat, cold sweat covering her body. The other women slept deeply, snoring softly under their furs. Only Thera was awake, sitting in the corner of the room with eyes gleaming in the darkness. The elder nodded slowly, as if she had seen the same dream. The following weeks brought a harsh winter to the coasts of Rogaland. Snow covered the turf roofs, ice formed crystals on windows covered with animal bladder, and the sea turned gray and too furious for sailing. The fortress became isolated, trapped between mountains and ocean. And there, in that frozen confinement, truths began to emerge like corpses under melting ice. Astrid learned that the honor of sitting at Halvard's table did not mean sharing his bed. The berserker kept his distance, never touching her, rarely speaking beyond short commands about tasks or warnings of storms. He spent days in his private forge at the back of the fortress, hammering iron and steel with force that made the walls tremble. The other warriors whispered that he was forging chains strong enough to hold a wolf the size of a horse, chains to hold himself. Thera taught Astrid the ways of the household, the unwritten hierarchies among women, how to avoid the growing wrath of Ingrid. The elder also revealed that she possessed Valve knowledge, though never formally consecrated. She knew how to read runes, prepare herb infusions, invoke minor protections with blood and song, and she saw in Astrid a dormant potential, that gift of calming storms mentioned in the ancient saga. On the longest nights, when winds howled through cracks in the wood and snow beat against the walls like ghosts begging entry, Thera took Astrid to a dark corner of the hall. There, by the light of a single candle, she taught ancient runes, not just the simple meanings everyone knew, but the true power the sacred letters carried. Asterisk Fehu asterisk for cattle and wealth. Asterisk Uruz asterisk for brute strength. Asterisk Therissa's asterisk for giants and chaos. And asterisk Isa asterisk. Rune of ice. Rune of stopping. Rune that could freeze fury in its tracks. Astrid absorbed knowledge with the thirst of one who has found purpose after a life of insignificance. Her fingers learned to trace runes in the air, to feel them vibrating with ancestral power. Thera said Astrid's blood carried something special, perhaps descent from an ancient Velva or a distant touch of the Vanir, gods of magic and fertility. Something that made the runes respond more strongly when she drew them. But power had a price, it always did. One night, when Manny was full and round in the black sky, screams echoed through the fortress. Astrid awoke to the sound of shattering wood, roars that did not come from a human throat. The other women clung to each other, praying to Freya, to Thor, to any god who would listen. Thera gripped Astrid's arm with iron strength, stopping her from running outside. But Astrid pulled free and ran. The snow in the courtyard was stained red. Halvard stood at the center, naked from the waist up, despite the brutal cold, skin covered in steaming sweat. His eyes were white, completely white, without iris or pupil, just milky spheres that saw nothing but blood and war. Muscles rippled under old scars, his body trembling with contained fury threatening to explode. In his hands, he held a war axe, and at his feet lay Bjorn the Skald, bleeding from a deep cut on his shoulder. Rolf and other warriors formed a cautious circle, spears pointed, but no one daring to attack. Ingrid watched from the longhouse door, a cruel smile on her lips as if satisfied to see the berserker finally losing control. Astrid did not think, she simply acted. She crossed the circle of warriors before they could stop her, steps sinking into snow as she walked straight toward Halvard. The distance between them was not great, perhaps 20 steps, but each seemed an eternity. The berserker turned toward her, white eyes fixing on her without recognition, the axe rising. She stopped 3 steps from him and began to sing. She did not know where the words came from. Perhaps from memories of her mother singing when she was a child. Perhaps from the old Valav who had taught her runes in secret. Perhaps from the Norns themselves, weaving destiny through her voice. They were words in a language blending Old Norse with something even older, the tongue from when gods walked openly in Midgard. And as she sang, she traced the rune asterisk Isa asterisk in the air with fingers glowing pale blue. Ice. Stop! Freezing of rage. Halvard roared, the sound echoing through the mountains. The axe descended in a mortal arc, but stopped a hand's breadth from Astrid's skull. The berserker's body shook violently, muscles fighting against themselves. The white eyes blinked, wavered, and then color began to return. Dark brown irises emerging from the milky haze like islands from fog. He staggered, falling to his knees in the snow. The axe slipped from fingers that could no longer hold it. Sweat and steam covered his face as he breathed in deep gasps, each exhalation a white cloud in the frozen air. Astrid did not move. She remained there, 3 steps away, hands still outstretched with the rune glowing faintly between her fingers. Blood trickled from her nose, the price of magic. There was always a price. Halvard looked up, and for the first time since buying her, his eyes met hers with full clarity. There was horror there. Horror at what he had almost done. Horror at the monster he was becoming. And something more recognition that Astrid was more than a market purchase, more than a piece in a game of destiny. She was his only hope. The warriors helped Bjorn up. The Skald cursing through clenched teeth while holding his bleeding shoulder. Thera appeared with bandages and herbs, her expression clearly saying she had warned them. Ingrid disappeared back into the longhouse, frustration and envy radiating from every movement. Rolf approached Halvard with a bearskin covering the Jarl's shoulders. He whispered something about chains and locking himself away. "How about the next full moon in 2 weeks? How about time running out?" Halvard nodded with a heavy head, but his eyes did not leave Astrid. She was about to faint from exhaustion when he finally spoke. He said the Norns had a cruel sense of humor sending her. He said the Velva who prophesied his curse also prophesied the cure, but the cure would require Astrid to give more than anyone should. He said she could leave with the first ship in spring, that he would give her enough gold to buy her own lands far away, that he would not force her into the destiny the stubborn goddesses had woven. Astrid wiped blood from her nose with the back of her hand and answered with a firm voice, despite the trembling in her legs. She said her parents had sold her to cure the infertility of lands that would not improve. She said she had been merchandise, an object, a burden to be removed. She said here, in this frozen fortress at the edge of the world, for the first time in her life, she had purpose. She would not run from it. Halvard closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there was acceptance. Acceptance that destiny woven by the Norns could not be avoided, only faced, in the days that followed. Thera intensified the training. She taught Astrid not only runes but cider magic, the ancient art of the Vanir, practiced by Freya and Odin, despised by ordinary warriors for being too feminine. Cider required trances, required blood, required connection to the roots of Yggdrasil that stretched through all 9 realms. Astrid learned to enter trances using bitter herb infusions. She learned to feel the threads of destiny woven by the Norns, delicate as spider webs but strong as iron chains. She learned that she could, at terrible cost, pull those threads, alter them slightly, redirect destiny for a brief moment. But each time she used magic, blood flowed from nose, ears, sometimes eyes. Each time, a piece of her own life drained to feed the power. Thera warned that if Astrid tried to stop Halvard's complete transformation, it might kill her. That magic of that level required equivalent sacrifice, life for life, humanity for humanity. Halvard also prepared. He forged special chains of black iron, reinforced with melted silver Rolf had brought from an old raid. He built a cage at the back of the fortress, a structure of thick logs intertwined with chains. He tested its strength personally, partially transforming enough for muscles to swell and strength to triple land attacking the bars. They held. Barely, but they held. One night, 3 days before the full moon, Halvard summoned Astrid to his private chambers. She had never been there before. The room was sparse, a wooden bed covered with wolf pelts, a weapons chest, a small altar with a rough statue of Odin. And on the walls, painted with charcoal and red ochre, symbols and runes she recognized, and others she did not. He told his story as snow fell outside in sepulchral silence. He said he had been an ordinary warrior until 20 winters, when he joined a raid on a Christian monastery in Anglo lands. The abbot had invoked his foreign god, begged for protection. But Christian gods had no power there. Only blood and steel. Halvard killed the old man without thinking, just one more life among many he had taken. But that abbot was not just a servant of the crucified God, consuming humanity until nothing remained but hunger for blood. Halvard sought a cure for years. He traveled to Uppsala to consult Odin's priests, went to Birka to speak with Velvas who claimed to see the future, sacrificed fortunes in BLTS, offered blood of animals and enemies to the gods. Nothing worked. The curse only grew, rooted in his soul like poisonous roots, until a very old Valvar, one who lived in mountains beyond any village, gave an answer. She said only a woman who carried Vanira blood, one who could calm storms and weave destiny, could stop the transformation. But the price would be her own life, not immediate death, but slow draining, years of life burned in exchange for saved humanity. He told Astrid she should leave, that she did not deserve such sacrifice, that he would accept the destiny of becoming beast and being slain by his own men. Astrid looked at the warrior marked by scars and curses, and for the first time since being sold by her parents, she felt something beyond fear or resignation. She felt anger. Anger at cruel destiny, at manipulating gods, at a world that demanded constant sacrifice from those who had least. She said she would stay, that if the Norns had woven this destiny, she would face it, not for him, not for the gods, but for herself, because for the first time in her life, her existence had meaning beyond being an unwanted daughter or sold merchandise. Halvard did not try to dissuade her again. He simply nodded, heavy acceptance in his eyes. The full moon was coming. On the morning of the full moon, a storm descended from the mountains like an army of ice giants. Winds howled with voices of the unhonored dead. Snow fell so thick one could not see 2 steps ahead, and the sea became a boiling cauldron of black waters crashing against rocks with Aegir's fury. Halvard was already in the cage before midday. Rolf and 3 of the strongest warriors helped fasten the chains, 1 on each wrist, 1 on each ankle, and the last, heaviest one around his neck. The berserker endured in silence as iron bit skin, as padlocks were locked with keys Rolf kept on his belt. Astrid watched from a safe distance, Thera beside her with a leather bag containing herbs, ritual knives, and a goatskin parchment covered with runes the elder had spent 3 nights inscribing. The ritual would require perfect timing. The exact moment transformation began, but before it consumed completely. The moment of balance between man and beast. To miss meant death for both. The fortress women were ordered to lock themselves in the longhouse. Warriors mounted guard on the palisade, spears and bows ready should the worst happen and the berserker break free. Ingrid, however, was not with the other women. No one noticed her absence in the confusion of preparations and growing storm. The sun began to set, hidden behind black storm clouds. The exact moment Manny raised his chariot would not be seen, but all would feel it. Berserkers always felt the full moon, even when invisible. It called in the blood, in the guts, in the bones. Halvard began to tremble as shadows lengthened. Sweat poured from every pore despite the glacial cold. Muscles contracted and relaxed in visible waves under the skin, like snakes struggling to escape. His eyes, still brown but beginning to lighten, fixed on Astrid with a mix of plea and warning. She nodded. It was time. Thera traced a protection circle around them with salt and blood from a rooster sacrificed at dawn. Runes were painted on the ground. *Alges * for protection, *Isa * for stopping, *Kinas * for controlling inner fire. Astrid stood at the center, Thera behind her, and they began to chant in unison. The words were ancient, in a language that predated even Old Norse. They were sounds the Vanir used when the world was young and magic flowed free like rivers before Odin and his brothers killed Ymir and built Midgard from his body. Words that made reality vibrate, that pulled at the threads of destiny woven by the Norns. Halvard roared. The sound was not human. It was wolf, bear, and something darker. The chains rattled as muscles swelled, as bones cracked and reformed under skin. Fur began to sprout in patches over his body, dark claws emerging where human nails should be. The mouth elongated, teeth growing sharp as knives, but the eyes remained partly brown. There was still man there, still a battle. Astrid deepened the chant, her voice growing hoarse with effort. She stretched hands forward, fingers tracing runes in the air that glowed blue ice. She could feel magic draining her, sucking life force like an invisible leech. Blood began to flow from her nose, warm in contrast to the freezing air. That was when Ingrid attacked. The woman emerged from shadows behind the cage, knife in hand, hatred burning in her green eyes like Muspelheim's fire. She screamed that Astrid was an intruder, a usurper, a witch who had stolen what was rightfully hers. She screamed Halvard should die if he could not be hers, that she would free the beast to destroy everything. And she cut the chains with a metal saw she had hidden, working on iron already weakened by days of tension and berserker strength. Rolf saw too late. He ran with spear raised, but Ingrid had already cut 3 of the 5 chains. The 4th snapped when Halvard pulled. Transformation accelerating with the taste of freedom. Thera screamed a warning, breaking the chant. The protection circle wavered, runes flickering. Astrid felt the magic slipping from her control like water through fingers. Halvard broke the last chain. The creature that emerged from the cage was no longer man. It was a wolf 2 meters tall, walking on 2 legs, covered in black fur. Jaws dripping saliva and eyes completely white, empty of any human spark. It was everything legends described when speaking of berserkers completely lost in Odin's fury. It was walking death. Rolf threw his spear. It struck the creature's flank but only drew a roar of pain that turned into renewed fury. The berserker Wolf spun and attacked with impossible speed. Claws tore through Rolf's leather armor like paper, opening 4 deep grooves in his chest. The warrior fell, blood soaking the snow. Other warriors attacked. Spears and swords struck muscle and fur, but the creature seemed to feel no pain. It grabbed one man by the arm and threw him 3 meters against the palisade. Bit another's shoulder, tearing away a chunk of flesh. Then it turned to Astrid. Ingrid watched with a triumphant smile, expecting to see her rival torn apart. But she had miscalculated. The creature did not discriminate enemies. It saw only movement, blood, prey. The berserker Wolf leaped on Ingrid before she could run. A single bite crushed her throat, silencing screams before they even began. Blood gushed like a fountain, staining snow dark red. Astrid did not look away from Ingrid's death. There was no time for horror or pity. There were only threads of destiny slipping through her fingers, complete transformation before her, and an impossible choice the Norns demanded. Thera screamed for her to run, pulling her arm, trying to drag her to the safety of the longhouse. But Astrid planted her feet, closed her eyes, and for the first time, consciously and deliberately pulled the threads of destiny. They were not physical, could not be touched with mortal hands. But in the inner vision *SEIDR* provided, she saw them silver lines woven by the Norns, connecting everything and everyone. She saw Halvard's thread, black and twisted by the curse, unraveling rapidly. She saw her own thread, golden but pulsing with vital energy beginning to drain. And she saw the point where they crossed. She pulled. The world exploded in pain. Every cell in her body screamed protest as years of life burned in instants. Blood gushed from nose, ears, corners of eyes. The voice from her throat was both scream and song, a word in a language that made mountain stones resonate in response. Astrid wove a new connection. She took a piece of her own golden thread, strong and alive, and intertwined it with Halvard's black, rotting thread. She tied them together with a knot not even the Norns could easily undo. She sacrificed part of her own vital essence, years of life she would never live, to anchor his humanity back. The creature stopped 3 steps from her. The berserker Wolf shook violently. The white eyes blinked, wavered. Fur began to recede. Bones cracked painfully as they reformed. Muscles shrank. The jaw returned to human shape. Teeth becoming only slightly sharp again, and Halvard fell to his knees in blood-stained snow, completely human again. But naked, trembling, covered in the blood of Ingrid and Rolf and others he had wounded. His eyes, brown again, full of horror at what he had done, at what he was, at the price Astrid had paid to save him. She staggered, legs giving way. Thera caught her before she hit the ground. lowering her gently. Astrid felt deep cold in her bones, not from winter, but from inside out. Life drained, essence burned, years sacrificed. Rolf was alive, but barely. Other warriors also wounded, but would survive. Only Ingrid had died, and her death had been by her own betrayal. Halvard dragged himself through snow to Astrid, ignoring his own nakedness and wounds. He took her hand, too cold. And when he looked into her eyes, he saw the true price. Hair that had been golden that morning now had white streaks at the temples. Fine lines marked the corners of her eyes, premature wrinkles of one who had lived decades in minutes. Astrid had sacrificed 20 years of life, perhaps more to save him. He whispered it was not worth it, that he was not worth that. Astrid smiled weakly, blood staining her teeth, and said it was not for him, it was for herself, to prove her life had value, that she was not just merchandise to be sold or discarded, that the Norns had woven purpose into her threads, and she had fulfilled it. Then she passed out. The following days were blurs of fever and darkness. Thera used every herb she knew, every minor healing spell. But cider magic of that level left scars that could not be healed with plants or words. Astrid had burned her own essence, and her body struggled to remember how to keep living without missing pieces. Halvard did not leave her side. He sat beside the bunk where she lay, holding her hand, whispering in a hoarse voice that she needed to fight, that the Norns' cruel destiny could not take her now. Not after saving him. Rolf, still recovering from deep wounds, ordered the Jarl to rest, eat, take care of himself. But Halvard ignored everything. On the fourth night, when Astrid finally opened her eyes, the first thing she saw were those brown eyes fixed on her with intensity that made her feel exposed to the soul. Halvard had cried. Tears had left clean tracks on a face dirty from days without washing. Warriors did not cry. Berserkers certainly did not. But he had cried for her. Astrid tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. He brought water, helped her drink carefully with hands that could crush skulls, but now trembled gently. And when she finally found words, she asked if it had worked, if the curse was broken. Halvard said yes, that he had felt it the moment the threads of destiny intertwined. The rage was still there, it always would be. Part of who he was, but it was no longer a monster consuming him from inside out. It was a tool he controlled, not chains that enslaved him. But the price terrified her. Thera estimated Astrid had lost between 15 and 25 years of life. Looking at her reflection in a polished water bowl, she saw a woman of 40 winters staring back, though she was only 20. White hair, wrinkles, and something in the eyes' weariness of one who had seen beyond the veil between worlds. Astrid spent 2 weeks recovering before she could stand without fainting. When she finally went out to the courtyard, spring was beginning to push winter back. Melting snow revealed brown earth, birds returned from the south. And ice on the sea broke into huge plates floating like discarded shields from an ancient battle. Halvard called a thing, a formal assembly of all in the fortress. There, before warriors, free women, thralls, and even children, he made an oath. He declared Astrid his wife before gods and men, not out of desire or lust, but out of a life debt he could never repay. He offered her half of everything he owned. Gold, status. He offered her the choice to stay or leave with enough wealth to live as a jarl, anywhere. Astrid looked at the berserker who had bought her as an object and now offered everything he had. She looked at the fortress that had strangely and painfully become home. She looked at Thera, at Rolf still recovering, at the other women who now respected her with reverent fear. And she chose to stay. Not out of love, not yet, but out of something deeper recognition of two threads intertwined by the Norns, impossible to separate without destroying both. The wedding was simple. There was no elaborate feast or grand BLT, just an exchange of silver rings before Freya's altar, witnessed by those who survived the brutal winter. Astrid wore a blue dress, dyed with woad, a gift from Thera. Halvard wore a clean tunic for the first time in weeks, hair braided with iron beads. But even as oaths were made, dark clouds formed on the horizon. A messenger had arrived 3 days before with news from the south. A rival jarl, one who ruled neighboring lands and had always coveted Halvard's strategic fortress, was gathering warriors. He said the berserker had lost control, killed his own people, that he needed to be deposed for everyone's safety. It was a lie based on twisted truth. Ingrid had died by her own betrayal, not blind fury, but perception was everything, and the rival jarl saw opportunity in a moment of weakness. War was coming. Spring brought not only thaw, but blood. Spies returned with confirmation that Jarl Arakir of the south had gathered 30 warriors, twice what Halvard could muster after winter losses. Arakir was a man of 50 winters, experienced in tactics, and unlike Halvard, he did not fight with blind fury, but with the cold strategy of one who had played **Taffel** since childhood. Rolf, still with fresh scars crossing his chest, argued they should seek allies, send messages to friendly jarls of northern lands, offer part of future harvests in exchange for warriors. But messengers took time and Arakir was already moving. Smoke trails were seen on southern hills, villages burning. He came slowly, methodically, destroying everything in his path to make clear what would happen to those who sided with Halvard. Halvard summoned all men capable of holding a weapon. Veteran warriors, youths barely out of childhood, even thralls strong enough who were promised freedom if they fought well. They totaled 18, against 30. The women were ordered to prepare for evacuation by boat if defenses fell. Astrid refused. She argued she had not sacrificed years of life to see everything destroyed by a greedy jarl. That she knew magic, that she could help. Halvard forbade it, his voice laden with poorly disguised fear. Fear not of Arakir, but of losing the one who anchored him to humanity. But Thera sided with Astrid. The elder said she had dreamed again of Raven and Wolf, but this time they fought side by side against a serpent coming from the south. She said victory would require more than swords and spears. It would require ancient magic, the kind the Vanir used before the Gyr dominated Asgard. Halvard relented, though reluctantly. He had learned arguing with Velvas was useless. They saw threads warriors could not, heard whispers of the Norns that men ignored. Eric Tyr arrived 5 days later, his army camping on the plains below the fortress. From wooden walls, defenders could see tents being raised, fires lit, and the rival Jarl's banner black serpent on a red field. It was deliberate provocation. Arakir would not attack immediately. He wanted fear and despair to erode the defenders first. On the first night, he sent a messenger under a truce flag. A young skald of 17 winters, nervous but doing his duty, shouted Arakir's demands. He said Halvard should surrender for judgment for crimes of murder and uncontrolled fury. He said if the berserker yielded, the others would be spared. He said resistance was futile and would only bring more death. Rolf spat over the wall in response. The messenger left quickly. Astrid spent the following days preparing defenses ordinary eyes could not see. With Thera guiding, she traced protection runes on the palisade posts. Sasterisk alges asterisk repeated hundreds of times, each inscribed with rooster blood and her own blood. She prepared herb infusions that would sharpen defenders' senses, make their arms stronger for brief hours. She taught the other women simple protection chants they could sing from the hall while battle raged. But the darkest ritual was one she performed on the third night. She went down to the rocky beach where the sea beat with growing strength of high tide. There, under the light of a waning Manny, she cut her own palm with Thera's ritual knife. let blood drip into waves while singing an ancient invocation, not to Odin or Thor, but to Ran, wife of Aegir, goddess who collected the drowned in her nets and ruled oceanic depths. She offered silver, offered blood, promised more if the goddess helped, asked for fog to confuse enemies, asked for treacherous tides if they tried to attack by water, asked that Ran remember the ancient pacts between Velvas and Vanir. The water boiled where her blood touched. For a brief moment, Astrid saw a feminine face forming in foam and shadows, beautiful and terrible, smiling with sharp pearl teeth. Then it disappeared. But acceptance hung in the air like salt and death. Arakir attacked at dawn on the fourth day. He came not with direct assault, but with arrows. Archers advanced under protection of tall shields, and a rain of iron tips fell on the palisade. 3 defenders were hit in the first minutes, 1 killed instantly with an arrow to the throat, 2 others wounded. Astrid dragged one inside. Applying bandages with hands that trembled but did not stop, Halvid roared orders from the walls. It was not berserker fury, but the command of an experienced jarl. He ordered archers to return fire selectively, aiming only at sure targets to not waste arrows. He ordered spear warriors positioned at weak points of the palisade. He ordered oil heated in cauldrons should enemies try to scale. The first assault came at midday. Arakir's warriors charged with an improvised battering ram, a huge log with an iron tip. They struck the gates with force that made wood shudder and crack. Defenders poured boiling oil and threw stones, but attackers had shields forming a roof, protecting themselves well. That was when the fog descended. It was not natural. Even the stupidest warriors noticed. It came from the sea in a solid white wall, swallowing everything in minutes. Visibility dropped to 2 arms lengths. Confused shouts echoed from Arakir's army as formations broke, warriors lost in milky white that smelled of salt and rot. Ran had answered. Halvard did not waste the blessing. He ordered gates opened and led a sortie with 10 of his best warriors. They knew every stone and tree around the fortress. Arakir and his men were blind. What followed was a quick, brutal massacre. Halvid moved through the fog like a ghost, war axe cutting the throat of an unwary warrior before disappearing again. Rolf, ignoring pain in his scars, worked his spear in short, deadly arcs. Other defenders did the same lightning attacks, retreat, repositioning. 8 of Arakir's warriors died before the Jarl managed an ordered retreat. The fog held until twilight before dissipating as suddenly as it came. When visibility returned, the invading army was demoralized, hurt, retreated to the main camp. But not defeated. Arakir changed tactics. If he could not take the fortress by assault, he would besiege and let hunger do the work. He positioned warriors in a ring around the walls. Out of arrow range, but close enough to prevent any attempt at escape or foraging for supplies. Days turned into a week. Food rationed. Water from the wells still plentiful, but morale beginning to crack. Young warriors whispered they should try to break the siege at night, that dying fighting was better than slowly starving. It was Astrid who proposed a desperate plan. She said the Norns had shown a way in a dream. She said there was an ancient tunnel under the fortress, built by original inhabitants before Halvard conquered it decades ago. A tunnel leading to a cave on the coast, hidden by rocks and tides. If they could exit unseen, they could flank Arakir's army, attack the camp while most warriors maintained the siege. Halvard questioned how she knew this. Even he was unaware of such a tunnel. Astrid said only that Velvas saw what was hidden, that *SEIDR* magic revealed buried secrets. The truth was more complex. In trance, she had projected consciousness through Yggdrasil's roots, traveling in spirit through earth and stone. She had seen the tunnel as a memory engraved in the very rocks. But seeing it in vision and finding it physically were different things. It took 2 days of searching before they found the entrance, a stone slab in the deepest cellar, hidden under barrels of aged mead. The stone resisted until Halvard used partial berserker strength, muscles swelling just enough to move impossible weight. The tunnel beyond smelled of damp earth, mold, and distant sea. Thera insisted on going with the attack group. She said they needed a Volva to guide through darkness. Astrid also prepared, but Halvard this time was inflexible. He said she had already given too much, sacrificed too much, that if he fell in battle, he needed to know she would live. Astrid agreed only when Thera whispered that someone needed to keep protection runes active on the walls, or remaining defenders would die when the main attack came. Halvard led 10 warriors, including Rolf, through the tunnel. Astrid stayed at the entrance, watching torches disappear into darkness eaten by stone. She did not know if she would see the berserker again. Destiny woven by the Norns was cruel that Ve gave with one hand and took with the other. The tunnel took an hour to cross, winding and narrow in parts where they had to crawl. The exit was exactly where Astrid's vision had shown, a cave hidden by black volcanic rocks. Opening facing the sea and invisible from land. The tide was low, Rand's final gift. They emerged into moonless night darkness, moved in complete silence, Viking raid training serving well. They surrounded Erikir's camp from the sea-facing side, a direction no one expected attack. Halvard waited until he heard shouts on the fortress walls. Erikir had launched his final attack, committing everything against weakened gates. It was now or never. The berserker roared a war cry that echoed in the mountains like Thor's thunder, and attacked. This time, he did not hold back the fury. He let it come, feeling muscles swell, strength triple, pain disappear. But unlike before, he kept control. Astrid's gift, the golden thread intertwined with his. He was beast, but beast with a warrior's mind. His war axe swung in lethal arcs. The first warrior lost his head before understanding what happened. The second took an upward cut that opened his chest like an animal carcass. Rolf and others exploded into the camp behind Halvard, spears and swords drinking blood in darkness. Panic spread faster than fire. Erikir's warriors, awakened from sleep by death screams, grabbed weapons with trembling fingers. Some fled. Others fought and died. The camp became chaos of shadows, screams, and blood. Erikir emerged from his tent with sword and shield, shouting for his men to hold formation. But formations require light and space. They had neither. The Jarl saw Halvard coming and knew he would die. Still he faced him. Honor demanded. The battle between them lasted 30 heartbeats. Erikir was skilled, experienced, but faced a berserker at the peak of controlled fury. Halvard's axe broke Erikir's shield on the third exchange, broke his sword on the fifth, broke his skull on the seventh. The Jarl fell into mud red with blood, eyes still open but empty. With leader dead, resistance collapsed. Erikir's surviving warriors threw down weapons, knelt, begged mercy. Halvard granted it, not out of kindness, but pragmatism. The dead paid no wergild. The living could be held as hostages or sold. At the fortress gate, defenders had repelled the final attack at terrible cost. 5 dead, 12 wounded. But when they saw Halvard's torches emerge from darkness, when they heard victory shouts, they knew they had survived. Astrid was on the walls, blood again flowing from her nose from keeping runes active for hours. When she saw Halvard pass through the gates covered in enemy blood but alive, something in her chest she did not know was clenched finally released. He looked up, met her eyes, and for the first time since they had met, smiled. Spring completed its arrival with wildflowers covering plains where blood had been spilled. Bodies were burned on a proper funeral, pyre defenders with full honor. Attackers with the minimal respect customs demanded. Smoke rose for 3 days, carrying the dead to Hell or Valhalla as battle and destiny had determined. Rolf survived, but was forever marked, left arm movement never fully returning after an old wound reopened during the final battle. Thera spent weeks caring for the wounded. Her infusions and minor magics saving lives swords had almost taken. The elder visibly aged after prolonged effort, white hair thinning, hands trembling even at rest. Captured warriors were held for 2 weeks before Halvard decided their fate. Killing them would be simple and within victory rites. But Astrid argued differently. She said the cycle of vengeance and blood never ended if each death spawned another. That families of the dead would come seeking Wurgold. Then those families endlessly until all were in the ground. Halvard listened. Not because he agreed, because he had learned the woman who sacrificed years of life saw angles warriors did not consider. He offered the prisoners a choice: swear loyalty to him, and join his garrison at half pay for 3 years, or be sold as thralls in distant markets. 16 of the 23 survivors chose to serve. 7 preferred slavery to betraying their original oath to Erikir even dead. Halvard respected both choices. Those who swore were marked with loyalty rune tattoos on the left forearm, a promise engraved in skin. The others were sold to a Dublin merchant with instruction to send them to lands far enough to never return. Erikir's lands were left without clear leadership. 3 sons had died in earlier raids. Only a daughter remained, a woman of 25 winters named Sigrid, married to a prosperous merchant but without military power. She came in midsummer with a small retinue, bringing traditional Wurgold silver, cattle, grain as compensation for the dead her father had caused. Astrid received her in the longhouse while Halvard was hunting in the mountains. The 2 women sat on opposite benches at the long table, measuring each other in a silence that spoke more than words. Sigrid had black hair braided in austere style, gray eyes that seemed constantly calculating, and a posture suggesting she would not bow easily. She offered not only Wurgild but a proposal. She said her father's lands needed a strong jarl or would be swallowed by opportunistic neighbors. That she did not want to see her family's legacy disappear in petty disputes. She proposed Halvard annex the lands, rule both territories as an expanded jarl, and in exchange she would maintain authority over smaller villages and manage trade. It was a shrewd proposal. It gave Halvard power but also the burden of ruling a much larger area. It gave Sigrid protection but required submission to her father's killer. Astrid recognized a **Tafel** player when she saw one. She said she would bring the proposal to Halvard, but had her own condition. That Sigrid should swear loyalty not only to the berserker, but to their house, recognizing Astrid as legitimate wife and equal authority. That future disputes would be mediated with words at a formal **thing, not swords and darkness. Sigrid studied Astrid at length. The woman older than her years should suggest. Hair with premature white streaks, eyes carrying the weight of magic and sacrifice. And she smiled slightly, recognizing she had underestimated the berserker's wife. She agreed. When Halvard returned 3 days later with a slain deer over his shoulders, he found the 2 women drinking mead and discussing trade routes like old allies. He stopped at the threshold, clear confusion on his scarred face, until Astrid explained the agreement. The berserker considered long before accepting. Not out of ambition, he had never sought lands beyond his own, but pragmatism. Empty territories attracted predators. Better to control than let another Erikir rise. The formal **thing* was called on the first day of autumn. Representatives from all villages under both territories' jurisdiction came, lesser jarls, important merchants, respected elders. Even a distant Valva from the mountains appeared, an ancient woman of unknown origin who rarely descended for mortal affairs. There, before witnesses and gods, Sigrid knelt and swore loyalty. Halvard accepted with a hand on her shoulder, a gesture elevating her from enemy to ally. Astrid stood beside him as recognized wife, wearing a dark green dress embroidered with silver threads, a gift from Thera that had taken months to complete. The mountain Velvar asked to speak. Her voice was like wind through ancient stones, and when she spoke, even the skies seemed to listen. She said she had seen a possible future in dreams, not certainty, for the Norns kept secrets, but possibility. She saw the house of Halvard and Astrid growing in power and respect. She saw children not only of blood, but of loyalty. Warriors and Valvas gathered under the protection of a Jarl who had tamed fury and a wife who had woven destiny. But she also saw the cost. She saw that Astrid would not live to the age she should, that the sacrifice made in blood-stained snow had sealed her destiny. 35 winters, perhaps. 40 at most, while Halvard, anchored by her magic, might live to 60 or more if he did not fall in battle. A heavy silence fell over the assembly. Halvard clenched his fists until knuckles turned white. But Astrid only nodded, quiet acceptance of a truth she already suspected. She said in a voice all heard that 15 years loving completely were worth more than 60 living empty. That the Norns had woven her threads with purpose, and she did not regret it. The Valva bowed her head in respect and disappeared back to the mountains that same night, her task complete. The years that followed brought strange prosperity to lands that had known so much blood. Harvests were abundant, perhaps Freya's blessing for a brave Volva, perhaps just luck. Trade flourished under Sigrid's efficient management. Raiders respected Halvard's borders, knowing the berserkers still lived there, and legends of controlled fury grew with each retelling. Astrid gave birth to a daughter in the 3rd year, a girl with light hair and brown eyes like her father, who cried little and observed much. They named her Brynja, armor, for Thera prophesied she would protect many. The birth was difficult, draining more of Astrid's vital strength. But when she held the baby for the first time, she said it was worth every drop of blood. Halvard transformed into a protective father no one expected. The brutal warrior became gentle when holding his small daughter, teaching her lullabies in a deep voice that once only roared war orders. Astrid watched and smiled, knowing the intertwined threads she had woven had not only saved his humanity, but revealed parts the curse had hidden. Thera died in the 5th year, sleeping painlessly after a midsummer feast. They found her in the morning with a smile on her lips, as if the Norns had shown something beautiful before cutting her thread. Astrid wept for her mentor and friend, but prepared the funeral with honors of a full Volva high pyre, offerings of silver and herbs, songs in the ancient language that made the air vibrate. Rolf became Halvard's chief advisor, compensating with strategy what he had lost in arm strength. Sigrid eventually married again, this time to a warrior from Halvard's own garrison, an alliance that solidified loyalty. More children were born, a son in the 7th year, strong and loud, then another daughter in the 10th. But time claimed its price from Astrid with cruel interest. In the 13th year of marriage, she looked like a woman of 60. Hair completely white, back slightly bent, hands trembling when holding heavy objects. She still practiced minor magic harvest blessings, home protections, rune readings for those who asked. But great magic, the kind that moved threads of destiny, was beyond reach. Her body simply had no more life to burn. Halvard had aged too, but gracefully. 45 winters had turned him gray at the temples, but muscles remained firm, new scars added to old in a collection of a life intensely lived. He no longer raided. Jarl and father responsibilities kept him home. But he trained young warriors, and all who learned under him left knowing not only how to fight, but when not to fight. In the spring of the 14th year, Astrid fell ill. It was no sickness herbs cured or runes eased. It was simply her body remembering it had given too much. Burned candles at both ends until nothing remained but ashes waiting to extinguish. She spent her final months in a bed covered with the softest furs, surrounded by children who already understood their mother was leaving. Brynja, now 10 winters and already showing incipient Valva gifts, sat for hours holding her mother's hand, absorbing final teachings whispered in an ever weaker voice. Halvard rarely left her side. Rolf managed everything, not requiring the Jarl's final decision. Sigrid sent the best foods, though Astrid ate little. Velvast from nearby villages came to pay respects, recognizing a sister who had sacrificed everything for a love she did not even recognize when she did it. On the last night, when Astrid felt the Norns pulling the final thread, she asked to be alone with Halvard. Children were taken by Sigrid, reluctant but obedient. Doors closed, leaving only the central fire's light dancing on walls. Astrid looked at the berserker who had bought her 450 silver coins 14 years before. She looked at the man he had become, still dangerous, still scarred, but also a gentle father, a just Jarl, a husband who had learned love through sacrifice rather than passion. She said she did not regret it. Not for a moment. That threads woven by the Norns were cruel, but also revealed what lay inside each person, that she had transformed from sold object to respected Velva, from nobody to somebody. That 15 years as his wife taught her life was measured not in quantity, but quality. Halvard held her hand, tears flowing silently. He said she had saved more than his life. She had saved his soul. That without her, he would be only a beast dying in a cage or killed by his own men. That every day with her was an undeserved gift. Astrid smiled, touched his face with trembling fingers, and asked one last thing. She asked that he continued to be a man, not a monster, that he raised their children with honor, but also compassion, that he remember strength lay not only in the sword, but in knowing when to sheath it, that he not let anger control him again, not after all she had paid to free him. Halvard swore with a broken voice he would honor all that. She closed her eyes, a smile still on her lips, and when the final breath left her weakened body, Halvard roared, not in fury, but in pure pain no berserker should feel. The sound echoed through the mountains. And they say even Odin in Valhalla paused to hear the lament of a warrior who had lost the only battle that mattered. The funeral was larger than any Jarl's in recent memory. People came from distant territories, Jarls, merchants, Velvas, warriors who had heard stories of the woman who wove destiny and saved a berserker. They built a high pyre of aromatic woods, dressed Astrid in the finest blue dress, placed silver and jewels around her, offered sacrifices to Freya to guide the brave Valvar. As the fire rose, Halvard stood immobile as stone, children beside him. Brynja sang a farewell chant in a young but firm voice, words in the ancient language her mother had taught. And all who watched knew they witnessed the end of a saga, a story skalds would tell for generations. Halvard lived 22 more years after Astrid's death. He never married again. He ruled with justice mixed with strength, expanding lands and prosperity. Brynja became a respected Volvar, practicing arts her mother had taught. The other children grew strong and honored. And when Halvard finally fell in battle at 67 winters, defending a village from unexpected raiders, they say he died smiling because he knew he was going to Valhalla. And perhaps in Odin's eternal halls, he would meet again the woman he had bought with silver, but one with destiny. The fortress on the coasts of Rogaland remained for centuries, passing through descendants. And on winter nights, when winds howl and snow falls heavy, inhabitants still tell the story of Astrid, the weaver of destinies, and Halvard, the redeemed berserker. They tell how love need not begin in passion to burn brightest. They tell how true sacrifice gives without expecting return. They tell how even the most unlikely threads woven by the Norns could create a legacy death could not erase.